Well, when I was teaching the Iliad and the Odyssey to the high school kids, I was continually blown away by what a fascinating experience that must have been to have Homer perform this epic for you on a nightly basis. I'm going to give you what they were called books. But I'm going to perform a book of the Iliad or the Odyssey for you, and we're going to do this around a fire. I've got a little lyre here, or some other bizarre string instrument that doesn't exist anymore, and I'm going to sort of almost sing this to you, in heroic couplets, and that using stock epithets, all of these wonderful things, right? And so I thought, well, what would that be like today? Is that even possible today? Do we have the kinds of performers that could do that? But all right, I'm not that person. But can we perhaps take that experience and update it for a modern prose audience?
What is up, everybody? You're listening to episode 81 of SFF Addicts. I'm your host, Adrian M. Gibson, and welcome to your weekly dive into the world of science fiction, fantasy, and writing craft. Joining me, as always, is my co-host, the Chewie to my Han Solo, the Joker to my Commander Shepard, my dear M.J. Kuhn. How's it going, M.J.?
Hello. I am lovely. How are you?
Doing very well, thank you. And also, if you want to support MJ and her work, I now have both copies. You can pick up Among Thieves, her debut novel, which is book one in a duology. Thick as Thieves is the sequel, and they're both amazing books. And I burned through it. I really burned through it, and it's fucking good, and you're going to love it. And hatchets, and swashbuckling, and like ships, and people dying, and twists and turns, and it's great. So just buy it and support this amazing human being. As well, a quick note for listeners, the official SFF Addicts Patreon and merch store are live, so check the links in the description to support what we do here. Also, don't forget to rate and review the podcast on your favorite podcast app and subscribe to the FanFiAddict YouTube channel where this and every other episode of the show is available in full video. Also, a heartfelt shout out to our two newest patrons on Patreon, Nicholas Fuller and Daniel Ryan. Thank you both so much for supporting the show. And now, welcoming today's guest, making his triumphant return to SFF Addicts, the sweetest man in Canada, even though he is American. Lover of tacos, Mr. Kevin Hearne, best-selling author of the Iron Druid Chronicles, the Ink and Sigil series, and more. Hello, Kevin. How are you, my friend?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's a pleasure as always. First off, congrats on wrapping up the Seven Kennings trilogy and your tour for A Curse of Krakens.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I just heard, seriously, I don't know, 4 or 5 hours ago that it's a national bestseller. It hit the USA Today list. So, yay.
That's amazing. Congratulations.
That's
Thank you.
Good.
And I mean, thanks to all the readers who made that happen.
Yeah, man, that's amazing. Was that the first book in the series to hit the bestseller list, or did the previous ones already?
It was.
Dude, that's so great.
Which is a weird thing that happens with me. It happened with the Iron Druid stuff too. Like the first 3, did their thing. People read them, and then it was the 4th one that hit the list, and then the rest of it did too. But yeah, people catch on after a while, and they're waiting for the next one, and then boom, they all buy it. So.
Crazy. I feel like that's like a best case scenario though, right? Versus the opposite, which would be like your readership kind of peters out over time.
Yeah.
If it's ramping up as you go, that's a sign of a good thing you got going. I love that.
Oh yeah. I'm turbo grateful. Yeah, for sure.
I think the same thing happened to Andrea Stewart. Like the 3rd book in her Drowning Empire series hit like the Sunday Times bestseller list. She was like, this is the first one in the whole series to hit the bestseller list. But it's so cool. I guess it means like a progressive fan base over the course of the previous books, and people are just, like you said, enjoying it, loving it, wait for the last book to drop, and then it hits, and then they all just run out and buy it.
Yeah, they want to find out how it ends, so yeah. And you've had time for people to find it, in the intervening years, because of course it is years. These are epics. It takes a little bit. Yeah, 2018, I think, is when A Plague of Giants came out. So it took me 5 years to get that sucker all done. So
yeah, but you did it. And you
Yeah,
wrote
it's
other
gotta
stuff in
feel
the meantime.
amazing.
So, yeah.
It does. It's the series that I always wanted to write. It's actually why I became a writer. I wanted to get this particular interesting and sort of very different epic fantasy told. So I didn't really have the chops to make it work when I was a little baby writer. But after I wrote 6 Iron Druid books, I'd learned a few things, and then I was able to pull it off from there. Even though Plague of Giants was like that was tough. I had a 24-page editorial letter because it was a weird book, then once I got the hang of it and how to get things done, then the next two were much easier to edit. So
Yeah. Oh man, look at that foreshadowing. We didn't even send you the questions. But before we get deeper into that, just to get started, in case some of our listeners aren't familiar with you and your work, can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Oh, sure. I used to be an art major and then an English teacher for 17 years in high school. And I was teaching a lot of mythology and stuff like that. And then that kind of manifested itself later on when I was writing the Iron Druid Chronicles, which is now a complete 10-book series that's an urban fantasy with a lot of mythology in it. And not just mythology, but, modern religions as well. And I had a wonderful time writing that. We have bizarrely, like, the dog became the favorite character. The dog was supposed to be, the comic relief, but wound up kind of being, in many people's eyes, the main character of the series, even though the dog never got on the cover. So that was kind of fun. And then I've also wrote a spin-off series from that called Ink and Sigil. 2 of those books are finished and out now, and the third is going to be out next October. I'm working on it now, finishing it up. And then I wrote The Tales of Pell with Delilah S. Dawson. And that's also like a complete series of 3 books. They're all epic fantasy, lighthearted epic fantasy, like poking fun at the tropes of epic fantasy. And
Prodding quite
yeah, you don't have to read them in
delightfully.
order. Yeah. It's a lot of fun. And then, then the Seven Kennings trilogy is my serious epic fantasy that I've really enjoyed, and it means a lot to me. And I'm very happy folks are liking it.
That's awesome. Well, I always like to dive into the nerdy origins of our guests because I feel like it's just fun. We're all
Mhm.
just a bunch of big nerds here.
Yeah.
So how did you get into reading fantasy, sci-fi? Do you remember like books or shows or something that just like sparked your interest and you were like, "Oh yeah, this is my shit."
Well, I wound up doing a whole bunch of stuff later on, but there was one author that got me both into fantasy and sci-fi because, when I was younger, I was, kind of reading those Hardy Boys novels that are, like written by 1,500 different ghostwriters. And so when I'm ready to start to get into something else, then I kind of got introduced to both science fiction and fantasy by Alan Dean Foster. And I was reading the science fiction first, which was the Pip and Flinks novels that feature a young red-headed lad with a empathic connection to a flying snake, so, an animal companion. So I mean, there you go. That imprinted on me, and that obviously became sort of a pattern for the Iron Druid later on. And then Spellsinger, it was the fantasy that I first read by him, and that featured a whole bunch of talking animals. So there you go. You can kind of see how that stuff wound up manifesting itself later on with my work. But he wrote, gosh, he is still writing it, and I think he's got over 140 books or something like that. I mean, he's had a heck of a career. So that's how I got started. That's your super nerdy stuff. I used to just go to the bookstore. He was writing so much that I would go to the bookstore and, well, look at that. He's got another book out, so I could just keep reading him. And then of course I branched out into, all the other stuff, read my Dune, that kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Man, well, thank you, Alan Dean Foster, for
Yeah.
sparking your love of this, but also animal companions.
Right?
Yeah.
Just love it.
Can never go wrong with a good animal companion.
No, man, no.
Right.
Okay, so after you just kind of soaked up a lot of Alan Dean Foster's work and branched out and everything like that, do you remember what initially made you think like, I want to be a writer? Was it that kind of stuff, or were you just kind of like messing around with your own fictional worlds, and how did that all progress into your adult life?
I know specifically what made me want to become a writer. I didn't want that until I was 19. And by the way, kids, when I started writing at 19, I didn't get published until I was 39. So don't give up. It could take a while sometimes. So don't worry about
Yeah.
it. I don't regret any of those years that I was trying and failing, because I just basically learned a lot. So anyway, in terms of what made me start to want to write, that would be Ken Kesey's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which, if you read it now, it can be a little bit problematic. But at the time, what I was really impressed with is that your narrator is mentally ill, and his language and so on reflects that. And then as he gets better throughout the novel, his language improves. And it was all first person. And I thought that this was just a fantastic use of, or an illustration rather, of what language can do, and how voice is so important to telling a story. And that's what made me want to become a writer, is to have the ability to create voices so compelling that you just can't put it down, and you got to find out what happens to this person that you suddenly care about. And I kept going after that, writing a lot of stuff, and I wrote 2 complete novels and a whole bunch of uh, novels that started and crashed and burned before I ever got to page 50, kind of thing, But the 2 novels that I completed were just absolutely terrible and full of cliches. It's sort of like training wheels on a bicycle, right? You got to have these crutches, these cliches and tropes help you get through your first halting steps or revolutions of the bike. And then, later on, you can get rid of those. Once you know what's going on and how to keep your own balance, man, you could just go ahead and write something original now. And that's eventually what I was thankfully able to do. So, but yeah, it took me 20 years to get to that point.
Yeah. And during that time, it's like you studied English literature, you became an English teacher.
Yeah.
And everything as well. Did how much did the teaching help in terms of influencing your writing, but also like helping sort of build your confidence and allowing you to take those revolutions on the training on the bike with the training wheels and make those mistakes and all those fuck ups and eventually make something good?
Well, it did help a lot because, of course, I was teaching mythology as part of the curriculum. So I kind of had a whole bunch of it internalized, which was a nice starting point for the Iron Druid. Then, of course, I was also doing a lot of literary analysis.
Yeah, so you had mentioned, how the mythology and all of that kind of played into the Iron Druid Chronicles. I'm curious, is that where the idea came from for that series? How did the idea take shape, and how did it, kind of come to be in Hounded, the first book in that series?
Well, I was reading a lot of urban fantasy in general and kind of enjoying it, but I was noticing some patterns. Like there's usually a werewolf and there's usually a vampire, often some other sort of human or human adjacent creature that was your main protagonist. And a lot of the plot was revolving about when are they going to bone. So I was like, that's
Don't forget the abs on the cover. There has to
oh,
be
Has to
a
be
set of
abs on the
cover.
cover.
fantastic abs, or otherwise somebody is in super tight pants and turned around and you're looking at that. So that was what I was reading at the time, and I was like, this is fun. I love the idea of these mythical creatures in the modern world. I really, really love that. But what can I do that's going to add to this genre? And so I started with a dog because I like dogs. And then I'm like, well, what can talk to the dog? I need a magical critter. And I didn't want to do witches or wizards because they have a very sort of master servant relationship vibe, going on there with like familiars and so on. And that was not what I wanted at all. I wanted a friend. So I thought, well, a druid might work. There aren't any druids in or in urban fantasy. So how do I make that work? And that kind of got me into researching the old ancient druids, not the neo druids or the neo pagan revivals of them, but the original guys who never really wrote anything down. That was both a blessing and a curse. The blessing part is like I could write whatever I want, and nobody could say, I got it wrong. So that was convenient. But also, you had to take what existed out there and make some choices. For example, Julius Caesar wrote a whole bunch about the Druids, but a lot of it was based in his real severe hatred of them and wanting to destroy them. But one little nugget of a fact that I thought was probably true, he didn't really have an agenda behind it. He said that they had a 12-year training period. Now, I couldn't imagine why he would say that to achieve a political goal or whatever. So I thought that that one thing is probably true. So I stuck with that. And then I took some other sources here and there, keeping in mind that everybody who wrote about the Druids pretty much wanted to destroy them, you know? So you have to take what they're saying with, you know, a whole bucket of salt or an entire salt lick. But when you saw consistencies among different sources, then you're like, okay, well, this is probably something that they might be able to do then. So there was shape shifting, you know, animal shapes was something that was mentioned across multiple sources, weather control, often the summonings of mists and things like that. Even teleportation was a thing that eventually became plane shifting in the way I was doing things. So yeah, that's kind of where all that stuff came from. And then I was looking in the mythology into it quite a bit. Irish pagan mythology is not really dealt with a lot in urban fantasy, except for maybe the Morrigan and Breed, sometimes Cernunnos, the horned god. They would appear, but not the rest of the pantheon. So I'm like, the rest of this pantheon is actually pretty dang interesting. So why don't we kind of explore that and have fun with it? And that will be my, you know, my thing that differentiates me from everybody else who's writing urban fantasy right now. And you know, I basically wrote it to entertain myself and then just got super lucky that other folks found it entertaining too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, on that note, I mean, it's like, did you ever think that it would grow to become like a 10-book series? And you've written short stories in the universe as well, but like, and then, you know, just how mind-boggling it is, because you mentioned at the beginning, it's like it took multiple books until it really took off and started selling more, but like 10 books is a long series.
Yeah,
you know.
I did not think I would get to do all of that. In fact, the very first, you know, when first starting out, it was like, write a book that could be a standalone, but with series potential. You know,
that term, that's the term.
Yeah, I was gonna
Yeah.
say, nothing's changed.
Yeah, MJ's like, yeah, I hear that. And so that was what I did. If you look at the end of Hounded, you're like, okay, if that's all there is, okay, that works. But it was definitely intended to have serious potential, and I basically sold a 3-book deal at first, and then did not know if I would get to write any more. Thankfully, folks found it somehow, and you know, were spreading the word and talking about it, and you know, bought enough copies to where the publisher's like, okay, you can write some more. And then when book 4, you know, hit the New York Times, then the publisher's like, whatever you want, go ahead.
Dude, I wish publishers talk like that.
Yeah, right.
Whatever you want.
Yeah, right. well, yeah. At least for that part, you know, they were like, this series is doing well now. So how long you want it to be? And that's when I basically said, well, I want it to be 9. Total, and they're like, well, fine, well, here's a 3-book contract for now. And so, you know, then they came back and gave me another 3-book, you know, contract plus the epic fantasy at that point. So after I was done with book 6, that's when I was able to do the last 3 Iron Druid plus the 7 Kennings. So yeah,
dude, so cool.
That's so awesome. Well, and I know, so you had mentioned earlier that the 7 Kennings it's kind of like the book of your heart, the one that you've wanted to write for a really long time. And I think a lot of writers out there can understand that. Like, I have ideas that I'm like, oh, this is going to be so dope. I'm not smart enough to write this one yet. Yeah. Let me wait. But what was it? You said you were reading a lot of urban fantasy. I'm curious, what was it about the genre that really caught your attention and I don't know, made you feel like you wanted to dip your toes into the writing with that particular genre?
With urban fantasy?
Yeah.
Well, I was just having a blast reading it. I was super entertained, and I enjoyed the voices that was going on there. You know, like Patricia Briggs, you know, the Mercy Thompson stuff was so much fun, and so I was having a great time with that and seeing, you know, the different critters that showed up there. And I'm like, this is great, because if you go ahead and accept that all of these religions and mythologies and so on are real, then you honestly have the biggest mashup possible. You know, anything can happen in the world. You know, why wouldn't you want to play in a sandbox like that? So that's kind of what attracted to me, to the whole thing, because it seemed like literally anything could happen, whereas some other genres are a little bit more, confined in what you can do. Space, gosh dang it, it has so many limitations on what you can do.
So many rules. I know
So
it's my dream to write a space opera, but
yeah, if you break
I don't
those
want to have to
rules,
deal with like FTL and like warp
right?
drives
well, and
and
like learn
all that
about
shit.
pressure and oh my god.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Or like Christopher Paolini was talking to us about like literally studying about quantum physics, and I'm just like, I'm cool
Yeah,
That
with
sounds
not
less
doing
fun
that.
than other things I
right.
could do.
Yeah, entire plot points revolving around magnetic boots. So yeah, you got to watch out. So compared to the huge studying and things that you have to do to write science fiction, urban fantasy was a lot more fun for me. So
I love it.
Oh man, yeah, I love urban fantasy
Me
for
too.
that, but
It's
I
such
think
a
it's like,
fun genre.
yeah, but what you're mentioning earlier, I kind of want you to elaborate on this a bit in terms of like what has been the most fun for you in terms of combining real world settings, like urban settings, but then bringing in that magic, bringing in that mythology and that folklore, and just like letting it run wild in a place that is so familiar
yeah.
to all of us.
Okay, well, let's do Rome. Ready? All right. So book 8 was going to be staked, and where we're dealing with the persistent vampire problem. We gotta take care of this vampire problem out there. So I had to figure out. I wanted to go to Rome and actually figure out where they'd be, because I'd like to do my research so that for settings, so that I love to have the reality anchor the completely batshit fantasy parts, right? Because
Yeah.
if you're looking at it as just fantasy, then you're like, what is this? You get taken out of it. But if your setting is super real and accurate, then that anchors people to your story and makes it believable. So that was a really key part of my research process. Is like every bit of my settings are real. You can go there, check it out. So I was already going to be going over to Europe thanks to a publisher. So I decided to go ahead and extend my journey while I was already across the ocean. And I used that as a research trip. So I was going over there for, I believe it was a con in Poland. And then I'm like, all right, well, I'm gonna slip out to Italy and Germany and stuff like that and figure things out for staked. So I have this. I need a like a guide, and I have this travel agent set me up with a one-on-one guide. She's an expert. She's actually an archaeologist. She could stand at any place in Rome and just tell you what's underneath your feet for 8 levels, whatever, that kind of a thing. So she calls me up from Italy, long distance call, to try to arrange my tour. And she says, Mr. And I'm assuming you're going to want to see the Vatican. And I'm like, nope, that's not where the vampires are. She's like, what? and so, yeah, that was nuts. And at that point, I had to tell her, look, I'm an author, and I'm not your typical tourist. I need something special. I need to figure out where the vampires are. She says, I'll call you back. So she had to go. She was a devout Catholic, and she needed to go talk to her priest and get permission to make sure that telling me about where the vampires might be wouldn't be a sin, etc. Once she got permission, she was like, I am in. This is the coolest tour ever. So she took me around different places in Rome. And one of the places that we went was the Spanish Steps, which was where John Keats died. And so, like, that was my English teacher geeking out, right there. But there's a wonderful fountain there designed by Bernini. It used to be a very poor part of Rome. I mean, it had to be if English poets could afford to live there, right? So, but now it is super duper expensive, and they have like these high end retail shops like Gucci and Dolce and Gabbana and stuff on the bottom floors, and then above them are these €1,000,000 and more, flats. So I'm like, okay. And it's just a ton of tourists milling around these buildings. I'm like, okay, that's where the vampires would be. They'd have access to all these tourists who could just disappear, and they would be in these really, really rich digs. Nobody would bother them. They've got security, all that kind of stuff.
Wait,
Yeah.
Kevin, sorry to interrupt. did Keats get killed by a vampire?
Plot twist.
Tuberculosis, unfortunately. That's what happened.
That's what the coroner said.
That's what the
That's what the
corner.
coroner said.
Well,
That's the
Oh.
story.
also Percy Bysshe Shelley was there kind of the whole time. Like if you go into where he died, they've got like a little bust of his death mask, which is super gruesome. I'm like, well, thanks guys for doing that for us, I guess. But odd decision. So yeah, you could still walk in there and like, well, yep, this is where Keats died, right here, and they put plaster on him, and they just left it there, and then they removed the body, and
Thank God.
it's something else.
So weird, man.
It's a bold decision.
Yeah. So there you go. There's my very long story about how I really love the meshing of mythology with our modern day.
That's
Yeah, because
so
it's like
cool.
cities themselves are so multi-layered.
Mhm.
And then on top of that, to be able to interweave things like mythology and folklore into that and kind of straddle that line between the familiar and the unfamiliar, I think is so fascinating. And one of the reasons why urban fantasy has been like such a beloved genre, even though some people might say like it goes through its ups and downs. Of course, every genre does, but I
Yeah.
think urban fantasy has a lot more staying power for a lot of readers, and why you see so many longer series within urban fantasy.
I think
than
it's a
you do
comfort
within a lot of
genre
other
for a lot of
genres.
readers, right? Because it brings big fantasy, at least for me, right? It's like
Mhm.
I love fantasy. I love those fantastical mythological elements. And when I can read something that brings that into my real world, it's like even if it's scary and dark sometimes, it's still like it's pretty cool. I don't know, I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I like the part. I mean, because when you're sitting in the car, you're going to or from work, or you're getting your next batch of donuts from Dunkin's, and you're out there bored in traffic or whatever, and if you start to think maybe there's something really cool going on just around that corner or whatever, and I can't see it, the possibility of mystery and wonder can be out there, and I think urban fantasy really serves that up really well compared to some other genres.
Yeah, yeah. And digging a little bit more into folklore, you mentioned about the inspirations for the Iron Druid Chronicles and how sort of like Irish and Celtic folklore and mythology in particular came into that series in such like a prominent way, which I'm really thankful for, because it's like even though my family background is from Ireland and Scotland, I don't actually know that much about it. So it is really cool to see it get some representation. But at the same time, like you've expanded it beyond just the Iron Druid Chronicles. It's like you in Ink Sigil, which is a continuation of that series, but also in the Seven Kennings, it's like you've combined, you know, Irish, Celtic folklore mythology, some Norse mythology as well. What is it about those particular mythologies and histories that have come to, just enamor you and something that you are excited to dig into and explore?
Well, I mean, I am Irish, and so if I'm gonna tell a story from somebody's perspective, that's an okay one for me to go after, right? I don't want to step into other folks' space. Whenever I had to do something from a different culture, I was very careful about how I approached that, and that those characters would always have their own agency and um, you know representation. I would always make sure that I was checking with somebody from that background, to make sure I was, not screwing up. So, yeah, the Irish thing though was definitely my bag of chips. And then, with Ink and Sigil, I also am, Scottish. I'm really a UK mutt. I've got everything in there. So, yeah, that's kind of why I drifted over to Scotland a little bit, but also just because that the one little couple of lines mention of Al McVarish in an Iron Druid story really caught my eye, and I wanted to know more about this character who was just sort of a walk-on fella and really strange. And I'm like, I wanted to know more about him, and then the best way to do that was go ahead and write a series with him. So
Hmm.
there you go.
That's the best thing when it's like something so seemingly small, inconspicuous is just like, yeah, like even if it's just like a one line description about this character or what have you, like I have this one character I'm gonna write like a sort of newsletter sign up freebie about a once renowned sushi chef. And he just has like he has a very short description in one chapter. And I'm like, I want to know more about you. Like, what happened to you?
Yeah.
You know, why do you love to cook? But also, how did you get to this place? And it's so cool how creativity and imagination can kind of just take these things and run with them.
Yeah, well, and I think it's the mark of a well-crafted world and character group for both of you guys. You know what I mean? If a character can walk onto the page for just a couple of words and you are compelled to extend that to a whole story, I think that speaks a lot to what you've created, which is awesome. So on the topic of mythologies and histories and all of these really cool elements, I want to dovetail into your other big series, Seven Kennings trilogy. So tell us a little bit about the origins. Like we know it's a story or a format of story you've wanted to write for a long time, but where did the inspiration come from? Where did the characters come from? Like just what's the impetus for writing this story?
Well, when I was teaching the Iliad and the Odyssey to the high school kids, I was continually blown away by what a fascinating experience that must have been to have Homer perform this epic for you on a nightly basis. You know, I'm going to give you what they were called books. But I'm going to perform a book of the Iliad or the Odyssey for you, and we're going to do this around a fire. I've got a little lyre here, or some other bizarre string instrument that doesn't exist anymore, and I'm going to sort of almost sing this to you, in heroic couplets, and that using stock epithets, all of these wonderful things, right? And so I thought, well, what would that be like today? Is that even possible today? Do we have the kinds of performers that could do that? But all right, I'm not that person. But can we perhaps take that experience and update it for a modern prose audience? And that's kind of what I was doing. Is I want to here's a bard who can take on the seeming of different characters who experience this cataclysmic invasion of giants from two different coasts. So when that happens, they'd been at peace for years and years and years, and then suddenly we're in a war we didn't ask for. Um, a lot of people die and a lot of stuff is destroyed. And how do we rebuild? How do we survive? First of all, then how do we rebuild? And when we do rebuild, are we going to just build the same stuff again, or are we going to try something different? And so there's a lot of big questions that have to get answered. And that's kind of what I was trying to achieve here. And that's what inspired it was, basically, what if I updated Homer, or that experience of Homer really, for a modern prose audience? That's kind of where it was born. And then it evolved quite a bit from there.
Yeah. But I love it. It's like after reading the first book and just getting such strong sense of I can never really I never know if I'm pronouncing this right, but in Greek mythology, it's like the Titanomachy. I think that's the right term, but it's like the war of the Titans and the gods and that kind of thing. And so it's like I love just the concept, or like watching a show like Attack on Titan, where you have these just like massive, monstrous creatures just upending society and life, and kind of seeing like what the consequences are of that. And I was curious for you, like after writing the Iron Druid Chronicles and taking all of those skills that you learned with that series, how did it kind of apply to writing the book of your heart, but at the same time it's like writing such a sprawling epic fantasy tale?
Well, I'm going to circle back to that thing I was talking about with the use of voice in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. The voice is the big thing, because here's what makes this Seven Kennings really unique, you guys. It is the fact that it is written from 22 different first person points of view, which to my knowledge has not been done before. Epic fantasies are typically written in third person. And if they are written in first, then we're talking about two or three, characters, and not all of these characters. Now, that's not 22 in the first book. There's 11 in the first book, some of them
over the course of the trilogy.
Right.
But which 11 is still a lot, though,
yeah. And also, and this is like a super nerdy but intentional thing I did. It it is skewed at the beginning when it's super violent and so on. It's skewed male in terms of the numbers of narrators. It achieves parity in book 2, and then there are women who are there's mostly women who are narrators in the 3rd book. So we go from masculine to feminine power in a huge change in the world. So yeah, that was really kind of what I was doing here. Is that my experience of writing the Iron Druid gave me the opportunity to experiment with different voices, especially book 3, where I had like a Canterbury Tales sequence going on in there in Hammered, where I think it was 6 different characters were explaining why they hated Thor. And so they were telling their personal stories about why they really wanted to kill the thunder god because of some grievance that they had with him. And each one of those people were from a very different background and had very different stories to tell. So that was my practice for coming up with very different voices. And then I also got to do that again in Trapped. I had I believe a Norse rune skald tell a story for a chapter, which remains probably my favorite thing that I've done. It was so much fun to write. So using that experience, I then created these, these different first-person points of view using the Bard to kind of link them all together. And at the beginning, it might seem, whoa, we are head hopping a lot, and I'm not sure how this is going to come together, but boy, does it. It all comes together. And if you think that one of the common criticisms of first-person narration is that, oh, well, if it's a first-person narration, then they can't die. There's no tension.
Right.
No, I show you how they can die, and it's fine, because once these characters, once these characters meet each other, then you're like, oh, you got 2 characters in the same place. One of them's going to be toast, and the other one's going to tell you about it, and that's kind of, once people realize that was happening, they're like, oh shit. Every time more than one of the characters meet, they're like, ooh, somebody ain't going to make it out of this one. So yeah, that was kind of fun to do, that whole, kind of reveal that this is how it works. So anyway, I hope I answered your question. Okay. Not sure if I did.
Yeah, dude. I mean, honestly, like, I'm so impressed with your, not only your ability to handle first person voices in that way, but your willingness to tackle that and pull it off. Because honestly, like, first person, I've seen some novels where they do a good job of balancing, like, here are some first person perspectives, here are some third person. But to have all first person for a lot of readers could be quite jarring. But the way that you handle it in terms of giving each person such a distinct voice, that you don't have any issue.
Well, that's what I was going to say. All of them have such a distinct voice, and I think the framing of the story being told by the Bard gives you really clear delineation. I think it's
Thank you.
It works.
Yeah. I take thank you. I take a linguistic approach to it. And I kind of always have sort of analyzed patterns of speech and idioms and things like that. And I basically don't want any of them to sound like Kevin. You don't want to keep, oh, well, here's another chapter where the character is different, but it's really just sounds like Kevin again, So I'm trying to make sure that people have different vocabularies and, perspectives that they're coming from. And so that's going to express itself linguistically. And so over time, you start to kind of appreciate that each of these people are real, hopefully by doing that.
Yeah. It's like, this character sounds too damn nice. That's too much Kevin.
Oh, right.
Not a nice world. So building on that,
Mm-hmm.
I get the sense that you love a good challenge. What have been some other big challenges of A, writing such an epic fantasy trilogy, but B, bringing that trilogy to a satisfying conclusion with A Curse of Krakens? Because I feel like it's one thing to take on this challenge.
Yeah.
And it's
one
bring
thing
it
to
home.
finish it and make it good.
Okay. So I might ask you for the second part of that question again, because I'm going to go. So the big challenge while writing it is writing the bad guys. If you're writing first person, you got to write the bad guys first person, and bad guys suck, man. I tell you, I do not like them at all. And I mean, you have to get yourself in this headspace that's really negative and unpleasant. And thinking callously about, just like, what if I turned my empathy switch to off, that whole thing. So to get there, you have to play some really dark black metal, maybe eat some oatmeal without any sugar in it, whatever. I mean, just make yourself miserable and hating life, and then you can write a good bad guy.
Is villain food.
Well, I'm sorry, what was that?
Oatmeal is villain food.
Yeah. Well,
unseasoned oatmeal is villain food. You heard it
that
here
plain
first.
shit, no milk, no brown sugar, nothing. You fucking madman.
Yeah,
I'm gonna tell you, I'm gonna have a villain eat plain oatmeal in a book, and you'll know that's an homage to this conversation, Kevin.
Yeah. He's gonna eat it. It's like, I want to kill everything. That's how it works. So
I mean, it tracks.
Right, it does. It totally does. Like, it was like, why don't I just go out to a field and like suck on a plant? So there you go. That part is really challenging. In terms of what were the challenges for bringing it on home? See, the bard is telling the story to like a sea of refugees outside one of the cities that got attacked. A lot of the cities fell, and the people from all those cities that fell all come to the one that survived, and they are, past capacity. And so there's camping out of this field, and the bard is telling them the story of this war. Like, how did we get here? And he's telling events from about a year ago when he starts, and then he gradually, brings you up to speed and gets you closer to the present day. And all of this is in preparation for them to launch a counterattack across the ocean against the giants that attacked them. So he tells them at the very beginning of Plague of Giants, this is going to be about 60 days, give or take. And at that time, that was such a guess, you guys. I had no freaking idea. How long is this going to take? It wound up being 54. So 54 days, not bad. And then when he brings it on home, he's got them all, up to date. The armies of the other nations have arrived, and they're going to launch their ships and go across the ocean. At that point, the bard can't tell the story anymore. I had to change formats in the third book. The back half of the third book is a completely different storytelling format than the bard telling you. So it's a little more conventional. You just have the people telling their stories in their own voice that they've written down, but it's collected by the historian Dervin. So that was a challenge to figure out. Also the timeline, because the bard was sometimes necessarily jumping around in time when he was telling his tales, and sometimes he was jumping around for dramatic effect. I'm going to tell you part of this story here, then I'm going to switch to somebody else so that I'm not just dwelling on this one character forever, right? So that was a challenge to then get the timeline correct. And I spent about 3 months unraveling everything, just getting the timeline correct, and it's in the appendix now, which nobody is probably going to read. But here's the story in chronological order versus the order that the bard tells you. So that it was also put in there for effect because Dervin is trying to figure out when somebody knew something because they didn't tell him, and he's very interested to know, like, how long were you keeping this secret from me? And if I unravel this timeline, I will figure it out. So anyway, did that answer your question okay?
Yeah, dude. No, that was perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's really cool because it circles back to what you were saying about the inspirations for the series in terms of the Iliad and the Odyssey, and how oral storytelling and the ways in which a story being told lyrically as opposed to in more chronological prose as we're probably used to today, the ways in which events unfold, they can shift in terms of what is going to give the most sort of dramatic effect, what is going to give the most appropriate effect at this particular moment in the storytelling process. So I like how you kind of play with that over the course of the series. Is really cool.
Yeah, and the last big battle that we find in A Curse of Krakens, it's all about a woman trying to reach the love of her life who's at the front lines in a battle. And so she's telling the story of that battle, being insanely worried the entire time that she's not going to get there or whatever, something terrible is going to happen. So yeah, that was, the way to give us the experience of a battle from a very poignant, personal perspective rather than let's zoom out, and show you the giant, orcs versus elves things at the beginning of the Fellowship of the Ring. When you see it like that, you're just like, well, wow, that's a neat effect, but you have no empathy or skin in the game for any of these little tiny characters. So how do you get that sense of scale on the one hand that this is a huge battle, but at the same time make it super personal? And first person is great for that.
I agree. I love
Right?
first person.
Zooming in
It's my
on one
fave.
person. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I want to take a jaunt in a slightly different direction.
Okay.
So we chatted with your bestie Chuck Wendig earlier this year,
Yeah.
and something that came up when we were talking with Chuck is the importance of friendship and community, and especially in writing, since it can be such a lonely gig
For
if you
sure.
don't find that community. So I want to know, like, what do those two things mean to you personally, and if you have any advice for other writers that are looking to find their community or become more involved in that community to make it less lonely.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. I mean, Chuck and Delilah are kind of my besties, and I've got a lot of other folks that I also chat with too. I've got like Jason Huff and Case Alexander in Seattle. We kind of give each other encouragement every day to meet our writing goals, whatever those might be, and we have our own bizarre little slang thing going on in our chat too. We actually have started to equate everything good with Jersey Mike's subs. I don't know,
That's
hey,
fair though. Jersey
like,
Mike subs are good.
yeah, that was your take. It was Jersey Mike's, but then we say it with like a really like obnoxious faux Jersey accent. It's like it was Jersey Mike's, that kind of a thing. So then we with Chuck and Delilah, we talk every Friday. Actually, I was talking with him earlier today. We started that when the pandemic hit. We were already friends before that, but just the weekly chat and connect on things started during the pandemic, and never let up. And it is like a huge anchor or a little lifeline of sanity in a world that's of course spinning insane for everybody right now. So that I think what you see, you get a sense of anyway online, is that there's a larger conversation going on social media, but then there are smaller conversations going on all over the place, like on Slack or Discord, or a little group chat that you might have on Signal or something like that. And you need to find just 2 3 folks, 4 or 5, whatever, but keep it small. Once it gets too big, it is too big, and it'll collapse. But if you have 2 or 3 folks to just kind of that you trust to be your buds and talk about things, and it really makes a huge difference in keeping yourself even keeled when looking at the news at any point will just make you scream. So there you go.
Fair.
Yeah.
Yeah. Find yourself the Chewie to your Han Solo.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Ah.
Pretty much. That's what you got to do, for sure.
yeah. All right. Well, wrapping up, let's do some fun rapid fire questions. Okay. What is your favorite food?
Oh my gosh, it would probably be inappropriate for me to say oatmeal at this point.
Please don't.
Let's go ahead and
That would change everything.
we'll say tacos. Yes.
All right. Favorite cocktail?
I would say an old fashioned if it's really well done. However, I would also say no longer. I no longer drink. I do mocktails instead. So these days I make a lot of zero proof gin mocktails that are just like the old fashioned ones, like a bee's knees or those kinds of things but just made with zero proof gin.
Yeah, the zero proof
Nice.
gins are good too.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Favorite pastime?
Favorite pastime would be reading with a blanket and a dog. Yeah, that's
And I know you also, if anyone wants to see awesome bird watching pictures, go check out Kevin's Instagram.
yeah, these days it's definitely bird watching stuff. I post a lot of my bird pictures on my Instagram.
Favorite thing about Canada?
I have not written a check to a health insurance company in 6 years. That is so freaking awesome. You know what? I mean, no, seriously, like every day I don't write a check. I was like, it smells like victory. I have beaten capitalism.
I don't smell the ink on my hands.
Capitalism.
Yeah, no, it's seriously great. It's such a huge stress off of your daily existence when you don't have to worry about getting sick or going medically bankrupt from getting sick.
Yes.
It's a gigantic thing, and it would be the best thing for everybody if health was taken seriously. Productivity is going to surge because, hey, people don't have to worry about that thing anymore.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, and then same thing. I really like the university stuff too, where it's a third of the cost of the United States, so my kid is going to graduate without crushing debt. So there you go; those are tied.
Speaking
those are
of
pretty
debt
big
and
things.
medically bankrupt,
Yeah.
What is your favorite thing about America?
My favorite thing about America? Well, I believe I just really love the artistic culture and the brilliant creative folks that are down there all the time. I mean, whether it's in the TV film industry or the storytelling industry of any kind, I think it's a fantastic group of folks. You're getting stories from all across this very large country, and that are entertaining and poignant and uh, make our lives better. So that's what I love about it.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kevin.
You bet.
I appreciate you answering this.
Yeah.
Well, let's wrap it up with what does the future hold for you? Can you tell us a little bit about upcoming projects, or I know you mentioned that you're closing out another series now.
Yeah.
So what can you tell us?
Well, early next year, in January, February, something along those lines, we are going to have a new collection of novellas coming out from myself and Chuck and Delilah. And it's going to be themed around dogs and drinks. It's going to be called Canines and Cocktails. And
Love
so we are each writing a novella with a dog and a drink. And mine is an Oberon's meaty mystery. So Oberon is the narrator, and he's on there with Starbuck, and the cocktail is the last word. That's actually the last word is supposed to show up in every single one of the tales. And Chuck is writing a story about Gumball from his Wayward stuff.
From Wayward!
Gumball! Like, I actually was shouting Gumball every time Gumball will appear in the story, and eventually my wife was like, "What are you doing?" She would just hear me shout Gumball for no reason.
Just throw some gum at you, just like, here.
Yeah, I'm making Chuck's story, babe. I'm sorry. You just got to shout Gumball. And then Delilah S. Dawson is writing us a story about a pit bull named Peach Pit. And so that's going to be fun. And really the Chartreuse Chanteuse is the name of my Oberon's meaty mystery. And it's really a happy ever after for Atticus, Oberon, and Starbuck. And I hope you guys dig it. It takes place right after Paper and Blood and right before the events of Candle and Crow, which is the next Ink and Sigil book. So those are my two big things in my urban fantasy universe that's coming out next year, is that novella and then the final book of Candle and Crow. And then I also have another novella coming out next year from Subterranean Press called The Hermit Next Door, which is sci-fi. And let's just say that the hermit is not from around here.
Wow.
Say, when you said the hermit from next door, I was going to say, are you writing a book about me? Because
right. Well, but you seem local, so this hermit is not local, and it'll be out in probably July of August next year, something like that.
Ooh,
nice.
Yeah,
love it.
Oh, that sounds great. Of course, it's not set in space, but it features otherworldly people.
Features potential space.
If you want space stuff, I do have another science fiction novella that's already out called A Question of Navigation. And I had to interview a physicist to make sure I was getting things right for that one. So yeah, it was pretty fun. I really love it. It's great. So you guys should check it out. Luke Daniels does the audio if you like audiobooks. He's great.
Nice. Awesome, man. All right. Well, to close out, I have a two-parter for you.
Sure.
If you can give listeners and viewers a good bit of soundbite writing advice, and B, tell us a weird or random fact that you find to be utterly fascinating.
Let's do the random fact first, okay?
Okay.
I just found out today that male moths will grow hairy butt balloons out of their abdomens They look like little
What?
tentacle things, right? Yeah, and I'm talking
Dang.
about not like a party, like a birthday party balloon. I'm talking about obscene animal balloons that are really long, but these are long and hairy and spiky, kind of, right? And they
Wow.
just come out of the back, and I'm like, man, moths have so much to teach us. You know?
Yeah.
What
About hairy butt balloons.
Yeah.
about mating? I mean, come on, this is a
What
novel approach.
our
It
mating
never occurred to
practices
me
are
like I
so
could be doing
juvenile.
something down there. So yeah, I'm going to have to rethink things based on this new information.
We would have to reconceptualize chairs and seating
Right.
arrangements
So
if we
It's
did
true.
something like that.
you guys, you just start looking at male moths and their mating stuff. Like, if you want to have a horrible time on Google, you go for it. And so that's your
Hairy
weird
butt
fact for the
balloons.
day,
Nice.
and that might be the weirdest fact you hear all year. I don't know.
No, I think Cassandra Caw gave us the weirdest
Oh
one, in
well,
that your butthole has basically has like a sense of smell.
that's
Um,
fantastic. Oh,
yeah, so
I'm no, that's
MJ wasn't there for that
I was
one, but
gonna
it's basically
say
like
I did
there's like
miss
an
that one
olfactory
in real
system in your
time.
butthole. So oh, speaking of which, we were talking before recording about what was it, chupacabra echo,
yeah.
which is like the hot new diarrhea term. Apparently this olfactory system is part of why we have that burning sensation when we eat bad Mexican food or whatever. So
There you
Dude,
go.
I am just going to praise my butt the next time it smells anything. I'm gonna say,
yeah,
you go, you smell that.
you go butt,
Yeah,
grow them hairy butt
well,
balloons.
well done. All right. So fantastic butt facts on the Sci-Fi
Yeah, man.
Fantasy Addicts podcast.
Right.
And then what was the other question?
Writing
Completely forgot.
advice.
Writing advice. Yeah, to bring it home.
Oh, writing advice. So
Oh man.
this is not going to be for everybody, but if you ever find yourself staring at a page going, how do I go forward? Why not try releasing yourself from the terrible tyranny of linear writing? If something in the future of your story is appealing to you, why don't you go ahead and write it and wait for the problem that's got you stuck to kind of unravel itself in your subconscious? Once I decided that there was nothing preventing me from writing in order, out of order, I did it. And that's what I do all the time now. I write whatever sounds most fascinating to me because that will keep me productive and excited about the story. And every word you write gets you closer to the end. There's nothing that says you have to do it in order. That's what editing is for, folks. So come on, let's go ahead and free yourself from the necessity to do things in order if that seems to be a thing that you can do. I have an outline, a very, like a rough chapter outline for my books. So if I am stuck on chapter 3 on how to execute my, my very sort of short summary of what's supposed to happen in that chapter, if I'm stuck on chapter 3, but chapter 5 looks fun, I'm going to go on chapter 5 and get my words in for the day and get closer to meeting my deadline. So there you go. Hope that.
Yeah, and like you said, like a lot of the time it'll strike a chord and it could even give you a cooler idea for something to do in that previous chapter, which happens to me all the time where I'm like, such and such thing I wrote down the line, and then I come back because it gave me this little trinket that made that previous chapter stand out just a little bit more.
Yeah, exactly. It can unlock what was going on, maybe even make you rethink what you were doing there and how you're approaching things, and maybe give you some ideas for foreshadowing or whatever. I mean, a lot of great things can happen if you start doing things non-linearly. But again, it might not be for everyone, but if you've never tried it, maybe give it a shot.
Yeah. Awesome, man.
Yeah.
Great stuff. Yeah, some very sweet writing advice to pair with our butt talk. Kevin, thank you so much for hanging out with MJ and I today. It was a pleasure as always. If you could let everyone know where they can find you online.
Yeah. I'm at kevinhearne.com. I spell my name with an E on the end for some reason, Hearne. And then you can find me on Instagram also at Kevin Hearne. I'm at Kevin Hearne on Blue Sky. And yeah, that's pretty much where I'm mostly at these days is Blue Sky and Instagram. I am not on Twitter anymore and will never be. So yeah, find me on Instagram and Blue Sky, and I'm on Facebook too, but just irregularly. And you guys can email me anytime you want. I've got a very public email address. It's just kevin@kevinhearne.com. So there you go. Always
Awesome.
happy
And
to
go
hear.
pick up A Curse of Krakens and support Kevin's work.
Thank you guys so much. Really appreciate it.
Oh, it's a pleasure, buddy. As well for SFF Addicts, you can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Threads, all that stuff at sffaddictspod, or you can follow me at Adrian M. Gibson. MJ, what about you?
Yeah, you can find me on basically every social platform ever to exist because I'm sick inside. At MJ Kuhn Books, all one word. Or you can just go to my website, mjkuhn.com. All the links are there.
So humble, MJ, so humble. You can also pick up MJ's books, Among Thieves
Oh
and
yeah,
Thick as
please do
Thieves.
that.
Yeah, go get those awesome books for some rowdy heists. All right, that's it for this episode. Stay tuned next week for our part 2 with Kevin for our mini masterclass on working through grief. Now, keep reading, keep imagining, and we'll see you next time on SFF Addicts.